Welcome to Secret Story. I inherited quite a bit when my parents passed away in a tragic accident. I was suddenly wealthy, but with few friends and no living relatives. I was quite lonely. I met my wife Valerie online and rescued her from death by boredom. She was more than eager to get out of the sleepy little farm town. The exciting news of the year was a boy putting a jacket and winter hat on his dog. There was a picture on the front page of the local newspaper. Los Angeles or Hollywood, it surely wasn't. I also rescued her parents' church from financial failure. At 23, I was 5 years older, but her parents reluctantly let her date me after I put a big check in the collection bowl one Sunday morning. She was a major cutie about to graduate high school. I liked her pretty face and long, dark hair with just a slight touch of red. I lived 2 hours away, but she was more than worth the long drive. By our fourth date, we were deeply in love. She kept repeating that she wanted to stay a virgin until marriage. She acted like a proper, respectable young lady most of the time, but in the back seat of my car. I was more than happy to pet and kiss her kitty, too. That I got a great job a week after finishing my master's degree. Between that and my large inheritance, I easily afforded our fancy and expensive wedding and a honeymoon in the Bahamas. Once we reached our hotel room in Nassau, we liked bunnies. At least 3 times daily for a whole week. We moved into my late parents' large home in Burbank. She wanted to get a couple of dogs since she didn't feel ready for kids. I'm allergic and suggested cats, but she's not a cat person. Instead, we made big donations to a homeless shelter and an animal sanctuary. We both volunteered at the shelter after church on Sundays, and she greatly enjoyed caring for injured animals at the sanctuary while I was working. After only half a year, I'd become quite frustrated with her bedroom frigidity. A month after our second anniversary, at only 7 o'clock on a Monday morning, I caught her cheating. When I saw the gardener her from behind on my laptop screen, I ran to the tool shed. I grabbed her wrist and dragged her into the house. She kept squealing, "Hey! Let me go. You can't do this to me, Ken. You have no right. Let go." Her long, dark hair fluttered in the breeze, until I walked in the back door with her in tow. I shoved her onto the sofa. For the first time ever, I shouted at her. There was fear in her dark brown eyes as I took several deep breaths to calm myself. "You know what's in our prenup and you signed it. There's a security camera in the shed and another in the backyard. They recorded you grabbing the gardeners." Her eyes widened as I filled my lungs and exhaled slowly. I angrily said, "You should have just told me you wanted a divorce. The prenup would have been $1 million if you were faithful." "The gardener? How many times?" "No. Please. I'm so sorry. It was just today." "How many times?" "Besides the party we went to, just this once." "I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Since I have proof you're cheating, you only get your car and $5,000. I saw a tear at the corner of her eye. "Ken, no. Please. I really hate doing those." I reminded her, "You liked them just fine when we dated. I was so in love. I was desperate to marry you. I still love you. Please don't make me." For a moment, we stared at each other silently. She continued, "Unless I agree to it, with all your assets, a divorce could take 2 or 3 years. Remember, the prenup says I get to live in the house until the divorce is final. If I can stay 3 months to find a place, and you give me $250,000, I'll agree to the divorce and sign. Please." I took yet another deep breath and thought a minute. I proposed, "How about we divorce but pretend to stay married, and you be a whore for me? I'll keep it a secret, so it won't upset your family. Anywhere I want, 4 days a week. That way, I can just kick you out if you cheat again." Her tears intensified and she tried to answer, it was a scummy thing to do, but I threatened, "If you don't do it, I'll send your parents a copy of the movie I made at the Jolson party last summer. What would your preacher mother think of that? My wife shook her head. No. Please. She took a deep breath and submitted. I'll do it. Be nice to me and keep it a secret, and I'll be your ex-wife. She swallowed hard. 4 times a week. I replied, if I catch you with anybody else, the deal's off, and you leave immediately. She mumbled through her tears, okay. Just don't tell anyone or hurt me. Please. She was the one in the wrong, but guilt still nagged at me. I played with her thick, dark hair and assured her, you know me. I don't like pain, and I'd never hurt anybody on purpose. She sputtered between sobs, thank you. I turned away, grumpily saying, go take a shower, stay home and don't let anybody in the house. I'll be back later. Probably. I drove a few blocks, then parked to send a message that I was sick and taking a few days off work. I didn't want to be a cheater like my wife, either. I left the club, bought a small bottle of bourbon, then drank and jerked myself to sleep in a cheap motel room. I woke in the middle of the night and watched a while I finished off the bottle. I finally woke up around noon. I got aspirin, coffee, and a burger on the way home, which eased my hangover a bit. I was quite surprised as I approached the house. A gorgeous young woman with long blonde hair was sitting on the grass in the front yard. I also liked the smile on her pretty face and the camel toe. The light blue fabric matched her eyes. I stomped the brake pedal a split second too late. Distracted by her arousing form. After crashing into the garage door, I climbed from my car. There were a couple of large dents but no major damage. I turned and gathered up the courage to approach the exquisite blonde beauty. As I walked toward her, she took a cigarette from her small black purse. I awkwardly said to her, hi, I'm Ken. Hi. She smiled at me and took a long, slow drag from the cigarette, then exhaled a cloud. Hello. My little sister gets out of school at 3 o'clock. What time is it? I glanced at my phone. 1:15. I like to watch the birds while I wait. She pointed to the trees across the street, then used her plump pink lips and blushing cheeks to suck in more smoke. She blew a thin stream of white toward my waist, then continued, you don't need to call the cops or anything. I'll leave if you ask nicely. I stared at her shapely body, spellbound by her magnificence, until she suggested, but I think you'll be happier if I stay. I swallowed hard as a solitary thought blared in my brain, I'd love if she stayed in my bed. I croaked out, It's hot out and I'm thirsty. Could I get something to drink? She wiped a bead of sweat from her brow and I noticed her long, light blue fingernails. I stared into her eyes a moment, seeing exactly the same color. Guh. Follow me. Please. She reached and held my hand as she stood. My name is Emma. Nice to meet you. Great. Hi. I'm Ken. I thought her giggle was terribly cute. He. You said that already. Let's go inside. She crushed out her cigarette with a sandaled foot, and I noticed her toenails matched her eyes too. Yeah. I led her to the kitchen and said, please have a seat. Would you like water, diet cola, milk, orange juice, wine, beer? I never drink before dinner. Orange juice, please. Sure. I noticed when she glanced toward the staircase and smiled briefly. I turned my head and saw Valerie walking upstairs in a bathrobe. The gorgeous blonde asked, who is she? I stammered a moment as I answered, my, wife, Valerie. Ex-wife. She'll be my ex-wife soon. That's a shame, she's very pretty. She licked her lips as I handed her a glass of juice. Were you two at the Jolsons' place last week? No, but we know the Jolsons. I'd been in London for business. I wondered if my wife. I swear I met her there, or somebody who looks just like her. She did amazing things with her mouth. Does she have a little cross tattoo under one of her boobs? An intense surge of jealousy struck me and I screamed, Valerie. When Ken shouted my name, Valerie, I knew I was in even deeper shit than before. I prayed silently as I slowly walked toward the kitchen. He was sitting at the table with Emma. She blushed and smiled as I approached, but the expression on his bright red face showed he was angrier than I'd ever seen him before. He took several slow breaths and relaxed his hands, which had been clenched into fists. Valerie, did you? I knew what he was going to ask, and figured it would be best to admit it. Yes. We had a good time at the Jolsons, but only once. He glared into my eyes. I gave you whatever you wanted, and you barely even sleep with me. And a bunch of other people. Why? How could you? The stunningly pretty blonde cluelessly asked, You two don't have an open marriage. You don't sleep with other people. He turned and told her, sort of. Ah. Not really. I hoped it would make her want it more at home, but last week I was out of town. Thinking quickly, I replied, if you wanted to take me to Berlin. Or Tokyo, or all the other places you go, you could have asked me. But why? Why won't you do that for me? Am I ugly or something? Emma rested a hand on his arm and said, You're not ugly. You're kinda hot. I felt a rush of jealousy. His face showed he was overwhelmed by grief and disappointment as he asked, Valerie, why? I swallowed hard and told him, I grew up in the church. My mom and dad are both ministers. You and I agreed we wouldn't have any kids until next year. Every time we do it, I feel guilty. Terribly guilty. Not all the time. I didn't want to go when the Jolsons invited us to the first orgy. I was horrified. I only went along to make you happy. After a few drinks and watching other couples do it. It felt like I wouldn't be in trouble since everybody was doing it. I don't feel guilty if I'm just one of the crowd. I couldn't control myself. I'm so sorry. I was extra embarrassed discussing it in front of a woman we barely knew. I can't explain it any better than that. I suggested, I'll do whatever you want if we're part of a group. I don't feel guilty if there's a crowd. I was surprised when Emma had a helpful suggestion. You can come over to my house tonight. We have rules. Do you want to? Ken smiled and eagerly asked, Valerie. I thought a while and bashfully answered, if it's at least 6 people, okay. I felt the blood rushing to my cheeks. Emma jumped up and said. Great. I'll invite some friends over for a barbecue. And then. He. We'll have a blast. See you there at 7. Ken asked, wait, where do you live? Oh, I didn't tell you that. 3 blocks down, 3800 Rosewood. I have to go call people and set it up. Ken lustily offered, I'll drive you home. I cleared my throat. We'll drive you home. Let me get dressed quick. Emma's large house was nearly a duplicate of ours, 2 downstairs bedrooms with ensuite bathrooms, 3 on the second floor, and a master suite on the top floor. Like ours, there was a commercial-sized kitchen, flower garden and lawn out front, large patio, and a small pool in back. I was surprised her husband was so much older. She was a college-aged blonde knockout, but he was bald and looked around 70. She introduced us, Henry, meet my new friends Valerie and Ken. Friends, my husband Henry. He was seated in a plush chair with a walker next to it. He held the walker tightly with one hand and offered us the other as he stood. Dr. Henry Hollinger. What do you think of my masterpiece? I asked, what do you mean? Emma. She's very kind and sweet, but she was only a little better looking than average when I met her. Tell them about the work I did, Emma. First I got collagen in my lips, then liposuction for my belly, braces on my teeth, then a rhino. Ah. He continued for her, rhinoplasty to give her a cute little nose. Otoplasty to make those small pretty ears, and half a dozen others. That was the final procedure I performed before I retired. The proud, smug look on his face annoyed me, and I was angry he thought of Emma as a trophy, an object. I restrained myself and politely said, very nice. She's gorgeous. Just wonderful. Dr. Henry asked, have you discussed our lifestyle with them, Emma? And your rules? Only a little. Then why don't you go have a cigarette and fill them in? A creepy smile appeared on his face. Emma held our hands and said, the patio is this way. We followed her to a table by the pool. She sat and explained, Henry doesn't like it when I drink or smoke, but he lets me if I follow the rules he gave me. If somebody sees me smoke and asks me to smoke their parts, she lit a long, white cigarette and exhaled a cloud of smoke. The light breeze blew it away from us. And if a guy sees me drink, he. The rules are only if I'm somewhere that Henry can see, though. The backyard, bedroom, or living room, or when we go to adult parties. With his health troubles he can't do it anymore, but he loves to watch. Ken was practically drooling when she blew smoke in his face. She inhaled another drag and blew a thin line toward my chest. She asked, do you like watching me smoke, Valerie? Would you like a cigarette? I nervously looked at Ken and saw Henry staring out the window. I told her, I don't smoke. Emma stood up and said, too bad. Ken stood and I hurriedly pleaded with him, tonight? Please wait until tonight, when more people are here. I stood up and tried to distract him. I think there's a baseball game that you wanted to see. Instead of the seventh inning stretch, let's go home, until tonight. He sighed and nodded. Okay, tonight. Life was awful until I met Henry. I was failing most of my classes. My mom kept telling me I had to try harder in school, but I was no good at it. She said I needed to find a job and a place to live by graduation. We were poor and she couldn't support me anymore. I got fired from 5 part-time jobs by the time I was 18. I dated 6 different girls and 8 or 9 guys. But none of them wanted to marry me, or even live with me. That I was lucky to get gonorrhea when I did. They gave me a shot and pills for it. Then I met my husband Henry on my way out of the clinic. I stood at the bus stop and he walked over near me. He was my grandfather's age, but generous and quite friendly. He offered me a ride so I wouldn't need to take the bus. We stopped for a nice lunch on the way. My friends thought it was gross I married a guy over 3 times my age, but Henry was great to me. He wasn't hot or anything, but he was the first person I dated that cared about my feelings, if my family was okay, and if I got all the sex I wanted or not. It didn't hurt that he was rich. Too, that I was very happy Henry adopted my little sister Claire when our mom passed away. Henry lets me smoke in the house, but Claire doesn't like the smell and stays in her room a lot. When Claire's home, I usually visit the Jolsons for an hour or 2 before bed. They have an open marriage like we do, and only live 4 blocks down. Henry, I was disappointed the pain in my legs and other health issues prevented me from standing much or walking more than a dozen steps. She dropped out of high school, and wasn't clever or coordinated. She often nicked or burned her fingers when she tried to cook, and she left even more messes around the house than I did, despite her deficiencies. She was a very kind and sweet girl who loved me. She was also a true savant at her single specialty. She wouldn't mind if a stadium full of people watched, either. I sadly considered what I would put in my will. I had many casual friends, a beautiful home, large investments and plump bank accounts, even a small private island. My sons followed in my footsteps, becoming plastic surgeons with a thriving private practice. I was equally proud of my daughter, who'd just been appointed an appeals court judge. I knew I'd lived a good life, no, actually a great one, but it was coming to an end. My prognosis was bleak, with my 3 potentially lethal health conditions. I knew I only had a couple of months left. Possibly 4 with some luck. I needed to assure that my beauty and her younger sister would be well cared for after I was gone. Our personal chef Cornelius took 2 racks of ribs from the wood-fired smoker and carried them to the kitchen. My bachelor party involved sharing a very nice bottle of cognac with friends as we played cards. I was asleep by 10 o'clock. She was kind enough to record it on video and watched it with me on our honeymoon. Our housekeeper Rosalie sighed and shook her head slowly, then cleaned the sofa for the 3rd time of the day that I sat in my usual overstuffed wingback chair near the front door and greeted our new friends. "Hello, Ken. There are drinks at the bar and appetizers in the dining room. Make yourself at home. It's nice to see you again, Valerie. Welcome." She held a covered bowl in front of her and said, "I brought a dessert. Thanks for inviting us. We love barbecue." I replied, "As do we. Please, have a drink and meet everyone while the chef finishes things up." Welcome to Secret Story. It had been a number of months that my Aunt Rachel had been serving me. Her daughter lived in the dorms at a nearby college but would periodically come home when her budget got tight, meaning that she'd raid the refrigerator, do laundry, etc. On those occasions, we'd tone things down a bit to shield things from her daughter, only a year younger than myself. My niece, Samantha or Sam for short, stood tall at 5 feet 11 inches. Years of competitive swimming had definitely given her long, lean muscles. One afternoon while Rachel was at work I had a knock at the front door. I was surprised to see Sam home from school. Usually she would call ahead to let her mother know to expect her. I brought her in and could see that she had something heavy on her mind. We walked into the kitchen and I offered her a beer. She refused and sat down at the bar. She placed a small backpack next to her that I hadn't noticed her carrying. Before I could ask her why she was home she blurted out, "What is it?" Confused, I asked her what she meant. "What is it that has you in control of my mom?" Not wanting to really go into the relationship between her mother and me, especially without having talked with Rachel first, I answered, "I don't know what you mean." At this point it just boiled over. Sam went into almost a tirade. "Bullshit. Look, I get that my mother needs strong men in her life. She married my father in hopes of him being that. Instead he was abusive and my mother eventually divorced him. She was glued to your father and I never understood how your mother tolerated that. I watched her go into a depression when your parents died, more than I would normally have expected. I then watched as she started helping you through their deaths. That gave her a purpose, but I could still see her depression. Then all of a sudden she's completely out of her funk and latched onto you. At first I thought that she might have begun to take some form of antidepressant medications. I searched her bedroom looking for them. Imagine my surprise seeing some photographs of her with your parents. There were other more explicit pictures. She had taken the pictures from her backpack and tossed them on the counter during the tirade. At this point she needed to catch her breath. Before she could continue I replied, "Yes, I know what it's like to find pictures of your parents in such a compromising position. Those pictures you found, I had found while going through boxes after my parents' death. I gave those same pictures to your mother." She looked at me in a mixture of disgust and shock that I then continued, "Does it really matter what the content of the pictures are? I'm sure that you stared at them for a while." "I know I did. Bottom line is that none of them looked distressed, forced, or not in full enjoyment of what they were doing. It certainly was in full consent by everyone involved." Then she almost yelled, "Then what about you and her?" Not knowing how much she knew or wishing to tip my hand, I calmly said, "What do you mean? I saw you too. What have you done to her?" When she finished she just glared at me. I responded, "I have done nothing to her, but let me ask you a couple of questions first. Is your mom harmed in any way? How about her depression? Find any medications? Who are you to question or spy on her? Sure, as her daughter you might have a right to be concerned and talk with her about it. You had no right to forage and spy on her though. You are not in the driver's seat here. Now go. I stood up and began moving to the front door. She burst, wait. You're right. I'm sorry. I'd really like to understand. I just don't. I turned back to her, what do you want to understand? She looked down and said, she seems so centered. She went from being depressed, to being extremely happy in like one day. It was obvious she felt like she belonged at your feet doing what she was doing, and I could see she felt loved, cared for. She continued, the way you were stroking her hair showed how much you cared for her too. Conversely, I could see a collar. She was like those pictures I found. I just don't understand how my mother could allow herself to be owned. Slowly, I responded, you don't understand the emotional and intellectual aspect. In any relationship, should people be completely honest, one person or the other is ultimately in charge. Ours is just clearly defined. I lead and she follows. She clearly knows about this type of relationship, has given full consent, and as you admitted, quite content. You should just simply be happy. Barely audible, Sam said, I prefer a man to be in charge. At least physically. I just don't get the two of you. First, she's your aunt. Second, she's so much older. Third, she obviously will do anything for you. I just want to understand. Looking Sam directly in the face, I asked, what confuses you the most? Without hesitation she said, the age difference. I understand maybe the dominance, as she did that with your parents. I can understand that you two got very close after your parents died. It's that you're my age. It's how can she be so ready to submit to someone your our age? You said you prefer a man to be in charge physically. How? Why? Again, while avoiding eye contact, she said, I once was with a guy who was a little rough. I liked it. Unfortunately, I could see the beginning of my father's abusive behaviors. He was quick history after that. How much do you want to understand our relationship? Are you willing to really find out? Quietly she said, I'd actually do most anything to find out. I sat there for a moment thinking. Then I looked her directly in her eyes and spoke very clearly. I will help you understand, but you must agree to 3 things completely. 1. You will come here on Friday night and plan on spending the entire weekend. 2. You will enter the house. You will not get your clothes back at any time during the weekend. 3rd, you will do everything that you're told. You will do so without argument or hesitation. You will be treated exactly as your mother. That means if you fail to do as I demand, that you'll be punished exactly as your mother would be. Again, fully understand you will be treated exactly like her. If you can't agree to these stipulations, you will never really know. Agreed? She nodded her head. We speak in this house. That way everyone knows exactly what is being understood. She said, yes, I agree. I quickly added, by the way, no mention of this to your mother. Understood? She quickly responded, yes. On Friday, Sam came at the appointed time. She walked into the front door. I took the clothes and placed them in a safe. I turned to her and placed a collar around her neck. I quickly locked it into place. We hadn't spoken to this point that I started, this is your last chance. If you agree to this, you will wear this collar for the entire weekend. You will obey my every word. You'll not be unduly harmed in any manner. Should you disobey, there will be punishments. I truly hope that that'll be unnecessary, as you're here to fully understand and thus should be willing to completely obey. So, for one last time, do you consent to my rules for this weekend? Yes, she declared. That I said, follow me. I escorted her to the basement that Rachel and I had converted into a dungeon. As Sam walked into the room, she gave out a loud gasp. Her mother was basically mounted to the wall like Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. She wore a blindfold. I had also taken the precaution of adding ear muffs so that she would not hear our entrance that I directed Sam to a bench nearby. I bent her over and before she could say anything I reminded her she was to follow my demands. She began to breathe deeply to help ease the discomfort. I told her good girl. I gave her a moment to become used to it. I walked over to Rachel and took the headphones and blindfold off of her. Once her eyes adjusted to the light, they fell onto Sam. Her eyes opened in shock that I walked over to Sam. Leaving Sam on the floor, I walked over to Rachel. As you can see, your daughter is here too. I will allow you to speak of this on Monday but will not tolerate a word before then. Do you understand? She slowly acknowledged me with a nod of her head and a blink of her eyes. I could see her anger want to explode. Her nostrils were flaring and her eyes intensely focused on me. I could also see her nipples full and hard. I reached down between her legs to find it wet just like her mother. That I walked back to her mother. Will you be a good and say nothing about this until Monday? She nodded her head. Thank you, master, and then she quickly looked at her daughter. Until Monday this is all I will say. Your daughter is here with full consent. She has what she believes to be some knowledge of your place within this house. I will accept no changes to your normal behavior. I will expect you to continue to serve me as you have already been doing. Have I made myself quite clear? Yes, master, was the immediate response from Rachel. That I then turned to Sam. Tell your mother that you have given full consent. Sam turned to her mother and barely spoke. Yes, I gave him my consent. Another slap went across her face. I told you once that we speak in this house, not mumble. Sam almost bellowed out to her mother. Yes, I gave him my full consent to do as he wishes for the entire weekend. I pulled a chair alongside the bed and instructed Rachel to sit down. She was to watch for the time being. What? Before she was slapped again. Giving her a dirty look, I said, first, you don't question, and second, you address me as sir. Understand? The slaps were not too hard. Just enough to get her attention and cause her cheek to redden slightly. Again. Making sure to fully articulate her desires in such a manner as to not upset me. That's much better. I looked over at her mother. It was then that we heard Rachel let out a scream. I then called for her mother to join her. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved. No part of this story can be reproduced in any form or by any electronic or mechanical means without written permission from the author. All characters are fictitious, and any similarity to actual people, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental unless otherwise state.